Okay, so not being able to go for a haircut, it's been kind of a struggle. So, you're just gonna have to deal with this. If you've followed this channel for any stretch of time, or you know me at all, you know that I love open world games. From the Assassin's Creed series, Red Dead Redemption, Skyrim, Witcher, whatever it is. I love it. Most of those games I just mentioned, though, have been talked about thousands of times. So here, I want to talk about some open world games that I feel don't get the appreciation that they should. Not games that are completely unknown, but games that just don't get talked about enough anymore. Games that are forgotten in the heap of open world games that release every single year. Whether they've had a personal effect on me, or they're just generally really good and don't get talked about enough, I felt it was right to talk about these open world wonders, get it, it's in the title, that don't get talked about enough. And today we begin with one of my favourite open world games, a game from 2K Czech that both blew its predecessor out the water and was much better than its sequel. A cult classic of the open world genre. That's right, it's Mafia 2. Before I get into this, there will be no major spoilers for Mafia 2's story, so if you've never played the game before, you don't have to worry about watching this video. And I might as well throw this in, if you're new here, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit like and subscribe, it really does help me out. Anyway, with that said, into the video. To put it simply, the wonder of Mafia 2's open world comes from its insane attention to detail. 2K Czech were able to recreate 1940s and 50s New York near perfectly, with the sprawling city being the perfect backdrop for the story of Vito Scaletta. Focusing first on the details, 2K made it essential that the game created a sense of immersion, and this began and ended with the city. Empire Bay truly does feel alive, a city that constantly changes throughout this expansive decade-long story. From the dirty, impoverished streets of Little Italy that Vito first comes back to the bright, thriving version of the area that he sees 10 years later. The city evolves along with Vito's character, and this creates a connection between the player and the open world, unlike that of many open world games today. Many critics have labelled Mafia 2's open world unnecessary, due to a substantial lack of side content the game provides. And whilst this point isn't completely invalid, it's not telling the whole story either. Yes, the world doesn't have much in the way of side content, at least with any real purpose, but what it lacks in playable content, it makes up for it in its additions to the story. There are countless videos on the details in Mafia 2. The incredibly realistic driving system, for one, gives a sense of engagement to what could be mindless filler. Each car handles so differently, and each section of the game changes up the driving, with the icy roads in the early game giving the need to be tighter and slower with your driving, as opposed to the late game. The fact that you can run out of gas, or get pulled over for speeding, or have Joe berate you for driving through a red light, gives the driving an added dimension of realism when compared to the likes of GTA. Speaking of cops and NPCs in general, we get to the other major element of Mafia 2's immersive world. To say that a game that came out 10 years ago has smarter AI and better NPCs than a game today is kind of a sad thing to think about, but that doesn't make it any less true. From the opening scene of Vito making his way through Little Italy, we immediately see how perfectly 2K Czech made these NPCs feel like real people. Whether it be fixing up their cars, getting haircuts, buying clothes, getting a bite to eat, hell, NPCs can even be arrested, getting shootouts with the cops, or getting punch-ups in the street. The class structure in the city is shown, with poorer neighbourhoods having more run-down, dirty cars as opposed to those in Greenfield and Midtown. Every single gameplay sequence, whether in a mission set piece or in an open world interaction, is crafted meticulously, each given so much care, and it's details like these, details so small that they may even go unnoticed, that allow the player to feel lost in this 1940s world. Moving on from the world, we dig into Mafia 2's gameplay, and it's here where the game falls a little bit flat. Although functional, the gunplay in this game is pretty rough, having too many inconsistencies and clunky moments to be written off as simply dated, and this is partnered with a fighting mechanic which is as bare bones as it can get. However, to give some credit where it's due, the fighting mechanic, although not super engaging, does allow for some pretty cool cinematic moments. Speaking of cinematics, the gameplay more than anything is just bittersweet icing on top of an amazing narrative cake. The story of Mafia 2 is by no means groundbreaking, but what it does do as a classic mob family tale, it does brilliantly. Held up by some great voice acting and writing, despite some funky lip syncing and cutscenes, each character brings something different to the table, from the fatherly presence of Leo Galante, to the light-hearted joy of Marty, to the star of the show, Joe Barbaro. The story of Mafia 2 is as much Joe's story as it is Vito's, as we see both men grow together, through the ranks of the families, always united by an unbreakable friendship no matter what issues they may have. It's tough to truly go into Joe's story without going into major spoilers, so I'm just going to put it simply by saying that the relationship between Joe and Vito is probably the best part of Mafia 2's narrative. On the other hand, we have Vito's story involving his father. A story that, despite providing a couple of quality twists, wasn't given the time it needed to be fully fleshed out, and leaving Vito's struggle with avoiding the path his father took as somewhat unsatisfied. The story of the game is short, only about 8 to 12 hours long, and with a couple of pacing issues it could be argued that it could have been stretched out a bit more. But the major time jumps, intercut with montages, don't come across as unnatural, as the story, the growth of the characters, and the adapting city flow fairly well throughout the whole game. Mafia 2 to me is no doubt one of the most underrated games of all time. Sure, its gameplay can be lackluster, its story is fantastic but nothing revolutionary, but where it blows the other games in the series out the water, where it blows nearly every other game in this genre out the water, and what makes it an open world wonder, is the way it grounds the player in the world, the way the player can truly be Vito Scaletta, falling into 40s New York seamlessly. And that's why, even 10 years later, I still consider it one of, if not the most, immersive gaming experiences I've ever had. If you've never played Mafia 2, never experienced the brilliant story of Vito and Joe, then I'd more than recommend it. It can easily be played over a weekend, and right now we all have plenty of free time, and considering it's only around $10 on the Xbox store, I'd say right now is the perfect time. And if there's any other open world games that you want to see me talk about that you feel are underappreciated, then comment down below and tell me, because I do read every single comment. This type of retrospective is significantly shorter than the usual type I make, but I felt like for some of these more underappreciated games, a more condensed look back would be better, so do comment down below what you think of this style. With that being said, if you enjoyed, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit like, and if you want to see more content like this, definitely hit subscribe. And yeah, thanks for watching. I've been Scarab, and I'll see you in the next one. Hopefully with a better haircut.